Hello and welcome. I'm Michael Scott, talking to you from Oxford in the UK, and welcome to this, the 29th event in our Zoom series, Cultural Encounters, Books That Have Made a Difference, where we are bringing together scholars and their audiences in order to explore themes of encounter in literary works and contemporary cultural debates. Today, our guest speaker is the very Reverend Dr. Martin Ganeri from the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas in Rome. Martin Ganeri is the Director for Interreligious Relations at the Pontifical University. Prior to that appointment in 2025, he was Prior Provincial of the Order of Preachers, the Dominican Order, in England. Before joining the Dominicans, he gained his MA in Classics and Oriental Studies and an MPhil in Ancient Indian Archaeology at Cambridge. Having joined the order, he also gained a DPhil in Theology from the University of Oxford. His teachers comes from sacred scripture, phenomenology, and theology of religion and archaeology. And his publications include Hindu Thought and Western Theism, the Vedanta of Ramanuja, and that's published by Routledge in 2015. If any questions occur to you during this talk, please type them in using the Q&A button, not the chat button on your computer. The Q&A button, please. Towards the end, I will ask as many questions as possible for our guests to answer, and I'll be joined also by Professor Michael Collins from Georgetown University. Please don't leave your questions to the last minute, as we may run out of time. With that, over to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Michael, and good morning or good afternoon to all of you who are joining us today, and greetings to you from Rome, where great things are happening, as you all know. So today then, I want to talk about a Hindu book, the Bhagavad Gita. The Gita is certainly a very well-known book in the West. It's said that after the Bible, the Gita is the most translated sacred text, with a steady stream of new translations appearing for which there is clearly a demand. As a sacred text of Hinduism, the Gita is often said to be the Bible of Hinduism, that is to say, a text that has a place of preeminent authority for Hindus, a text that serves to unify Hindus, whether in belief or in common purpose. And in the modern period, there is good reason for claiming this, but it's not always been the case. The Gita has, from its origin many centuries ago, down the ages, certainly been a very important text in Hinduism, but it was only in the first decades of the 20th century that it became a very popular book for Hindus and began to be promoted by Hindus as being the preeminent book in Hinduism, a book that could and should unite Hindus all together. Now, the fact that this development took place was itself due to the wider intercultural exchange that occurred between the West and India in the modern period. This exchange involved the realities of Western colonial power over India and of missionary campaigns to convert Hindus to Christianity. It saw a gradual knowledge about Hinduism emerge in the West and Western perceptions of what Hinduism might be, as well as a fascination with Hinduism as part of the newly discovered wisdom of the East. And it was an intercultural exchange in which Hindus themselves appropriated Western perceptions of Hinduism and then refashioned them in order to serve their own purposes. As they struggled to resist colonial and missionary forces, to unify and galvanize Hindus so that they could both regain their pride and win their freedom. And the Gita was caught up in this intercultural exchange between the East and the West. The Gita, we might say, was part of an intercultural phenomenon. As you know, was a fairly plain type of bread, originally eaten in the south of Italy, was then taken to the United States and transformed into something that had many different toppings, only to return to Italy and to become the national dish of the whole of Italy itself. The pizza effect denotes then a form of cultural exchange in which elements of a culture are transformed in a similar way by their encounter with another culture. And this happened with the Gita and with modern Hinduism more widely, and led in the 20th century to the Gita itself being seen by Hindus as well as Westerners as the Bible of Hinduism. Now, in this presentation, I want first to talk about the Gita itself and its message, and then identify the importance the Gita had in the pre-modern period in Hinduism, and then move on to trace the factors that led to its rise to prominence in the 20th century, with particular reference to the role the Gita had in the life and work of one of the figures of modern India who made a great difference both to the people of that country and to the world as a whole, that is to say, Mahatma Gandhi. First then, a little bit about the Gita itself. Well, the Bhagavad Gita is a short work consisting of 700 verses divided into 18 chapters. It is a poetic work, and as a poetic work, it's outstanding not only for the ideas that it contains, but also for its quality as literature. The Sanskrit in which it is written is very sophisticated and beautiful, and part of the reason why it is often difficult to make immediate sense of is simply the fact that it is written to be pleasing to the ear and not just logical to the mind. The Gita takes the form of a dialogue between the god Krishna and the epic hero Arjuna. As a dialogue of Krishna, it is then located as a sacred text, especially for the wider Hindu theistic tradition of Vaishnavism, centered on the god Vishnu. In the Gita, Krishna is represented as the full manifestation of the divinity of Vishnu. As a dialogue with Arjuna, the Gita is set within the great Sanskrit epic of the Mahabharata, a major theme in which is the conflict between two sets of cousins, the Kauravas, the sons of Dhritarashtra, led by Duryodhana, and the Pandavas led by Yudhishthira. Arjuna is one of the Pandavas, and the Gita is a dialogue between Arjuna and Krishna on the eve of the great battle between these two sets of cousins. Krishna, in fact, acts as the charioteer of Arjuna's war chariot. As Arjuna contemplates the enemy forces arranged for battle in front of him, he is struck by the fact that it is his own relatives that he is about to fight, along with respected teachers and friends. And this creates for him a profound sense of ethical conflict. On the one hand, his duty as a warrior is to fight. On the other hand, his duty as a member of a family is to protect and honor his other family members. As the Gita puts it, there as they stood, Arjuna saw fathers, grandsires, teachers, uncles, brothers, sons, grandsons, and comrades, fathers-in-laws, and friends in both armies. And seeing them, all his kinsmen, thus arrayed, Arjuna was filled with deep compassion and desponding spoke these words, Krishna, when I see these mine own folk standing before me, spoiling for the fight, my limbs give way, my mouth dries up, trembling seizes upon my body, and my body's hairs stand up in dread. My bow Gandiva slips from my hand, my very skin is all ablaze. I cannot stand and my mind seems to wander. Krishna, adverse omens too do I see, nor can I discern aught good in striking down in battle mine own folk. Therefore we have no right to kill the sons of Dhritarashtra and their kin. For Krishna, were we to lay low our own folk, how could we be happy? And even if bereft of sense by greed, they cannot see that to ruin a family is wickedness, and to break one's word a crime. How should we not be wise enough to shun this evil thing? For we clearly see that to ruin a family is wickedness. Once the family is ruined, the primeval family laws collapse. Once law is destroyed, then lawlessness overwhelms all that is known as family. So we see here then a conflict of what's called dharma, which is a central concept within Hinduism. Dharma means right order, a right order that exists in human society and a right order that exists in the natural world. The problem is that often seems to be a conflict of demands, a conflict of dharma, when one type of duty does collide with another. And the exploration of the different types of conflict of dharma that arise in human life is a central theme in the Hindu epics, such as the Mahabharata. In the Gita, the conflict of dharma is then one between the dharma of being a warrior, the duty of being a warrior, and the dharma, the duty of being a family member. And faced by this conflict, then Arjuna refuses to fight. And on one level, the whole of the Gita is the attempt by Krishna to persuade Arjuna then to fight. And Krishna's attempts range from simply the appeal to a sense of personal honor or shame to an exploration of the deeper ethical and theological reasons that might resolve Arjuna's sense of conflict and revulsion. In terms of the deeper ethics, Krishna encourages Arjuna to practice a form of ethics centered on disinterested action, nishkarma karma, action, that is to say, done purely out of duty, without any interest in getting the fruits of that action. So Arjuna's duty is to fight because he is a warrior. If he acts in order to get victory over his enemies, in other words, to get the fruit of his actions, this is interested action, in action with the interest in getting the fruits of his actions. If, however, he fights simply because it is his duty, then he acts in a disinterested way. And if he does so, Krishna teaches, he will be free from experiencing the consequences of these actions or being responsible for them. As Krishna tells Arjuna, consider your own duty, then you too have no cause to quail. For better a fight prescribed by law is nothing for a man of the princely class. Happy the warriors indeed who become involved in such a war as this, presented by pure chance and open the doors of paradise. Work alone is your proper business, never the fruits it may produce. Let not your motive be the fruits of works, nor your attachment to mere worklessness. Do the work that is prescribed for you, for to work is better than to do no work at all. For without working you will not succeed, even in keeping your body in good repair. This world is bound by works, by bonds of work, save when that work is done for sacrifice. Work to this end, Arjuna, from all attachment free. Now this leads on, moreover, to the deeper theological reasons and to the other major theme of the Gita, which is the revelation of the identity of Krishna himself as God and Lord of the universe. As the dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna unfolds, so Krishna reveals himself as the creator of the world, the one on whom the world depends completely for its existence. As Krishna tells Arjuna, By me, unmanifest in form, all this universe was spun. In me subsist all beings. I do not subsist in them. Myself sustains all beings. It does not subsist in them. It causes them to be and grow. As in wide space subsists the mighty wind, blowing at will ever and everywhere, so do all contingent beings subsist in me. So must you understand it. And in the Gita, the world is said to be the body of Krishna, in which Krishna is intimately present, yet always transcendent. Thus, in the 11th chapter of the Gita, where we get a great manifest theophany of Krishna's nature, we read, "Then Krishna, the great Lord, revealed to Arjuna his highest sovereign form. If in bright heaven together should arise the shining brilliance of 1,000 suns, then would that perhaps resemble the brilliance of that God so great of self. Then did Arjuna see the whole wide universe in one converged, there in the body of the God of gods, yet divided out in multiplicity." And Krishna reveals to Arjuna that as creator and lord of the world, that is his body, Krishna himself acts continuously in maintaining the world's existence and preserving or restoring its right order. The right order both of the natural world as a whole and that of human society. Human society, which in traditional Hindu thinking is centered on the fourfold caste system, of which the kingly or warrior caste to which Arjuna belongs is a fundamental part. At the same time, Krishna transcends all of his actions, in the sense that Krishna remains always changeless, even as he acts, and his actions are not done out of any need on his part and contribute nothing to his divine being. As he tells Arjuna again, the fourfold caste system did I generate with categories of constituents and works. Of this I am the doer, the ancient. This know, and yet I am the changeless one who does not do or act. Works can never affect me. I have no yearning for their fruits. Whosoever should know that this is how I am would never be bound by works. Knowing this, the ancients too did work, though seeking all the while release from temporal life. So do you work and act as the ancients did in days of old. In this way, then, Krishna teaches Arjuna that disinterested action is in fact a human way of imitating the character of divine action. Such disinterested action is furthermore the way in which human beings fulfill the divine action in the world. For God wills that human beings carry out the action which is their duty, depending on their station in life. In the case of Arjuna, this is his duty to fight as a warrior. By so doing, then, he will simply be affecting the will of Krishna in the world. The will of Krishna, that is, that the great battle be fought and that Arjuna's enemies be destroyed. The most profound message of the Gita, however, is the revelation of the love of Krishna as God for human beings and the call on human beings to center their lives in love of him. Krishna reveals to Arjuna that human life finds its meaning and happiness when a person makes all of their thoughts and actions into acts of devotion or love for Krishna. This relationship is itself a response to the fact that Krishna loves human beings and seeks their welfare and their release from the trials of life, which finally will mean the enjoyment of an eternal state of blissful union with Krishna as God. So all a person's thoughts and actions are to be offered to Krishna. In this way, a person truly transcends any attachment to their results, to the results of their actions. As Krishna teaches Arjuna, be it a leaf or a flower or fruit or water, that a zealous soul may offer me with love's devotion, that do I willingly accept, for it was love that made the offering. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer in sacrifice or give away in alms, whatever penance you may perform, offer it up to me. So from these bonds which works of their very nature forge, whose fruits are fair and foul, you will be freed, yourself now integrated by renunciation and spiritual exercise. Set free, you will draw nigh to me. In all contingent beings, the same am I. None do I hate, and none do I fondly love. But those who commune with me in love's devotion abide in me, and I in them. It is this relationship of the love of God for human beings and of their happiness in love of God that is the final message of the Gita, that Krishna reveals to Arjuna at the very end of the Gita itself. And now again give ear to this my highest word, of all the most mysterious. I love you well. Therefore will I tell you your salvation. Bear me in mind, love me and worship me. Sacrifice, prostrate yourself to me. So will you come to me, I promise you truly, for you are dear to me. Give up all things of law, turn to me, your only refuge, for I will deliver you from all evils. Have no care. So that's a little bit about the Gita and its message then. Then moving on to say a little bit about the place of the Gita in traditional Hinduism. Before the 20th century, the Gita certainly held an important place in traditional Hinduism. In the first place, it was a foundational text for the most important of all Hindu theological traditions, called the Vedanta. The name Vedanta means the end or goal of the Vedas, and this refers to the final part of the Vedic sacred texts, known as the Upanishads. And by extension, Vedanta comes to mean the tradition of theology based on the Upanishads, along with two other foundational texts, the Brahma Sutra text, which is taken to give a kind of summary of the teaching of the Upanishads, and the Gita itself. The task of any major Vedantic theologian was to offer a commentary on these three foundational texts, to show how the teaching of the three texts cohered with each other, and to show how the systematic theology that the particular theologian was promoting was drawn from them. Thus, Shankara, Ramanuja, and Madhva, and others, all wrote very substantial commentaries on the Gita, and these have remained of very great importance for Hindus in approaching the text. Vedanta theology was of particular importance for the Vaishnava traditions of Hindu theism. As we have noted already, the Gita should be located within the Vaishnava traditions. Now, over the course of the centuries, many different Vaishnava schools or sub-traditions developed, and it became fundamental for recognition as a valid Vaishnava tradition that it had a form of Vedanta theological system which supported its claims. So we can see then that the Gita had a great importance within traditional Hinduism as part of the Vedanta tradition, and within the wider importance of the Vedanta tradition of theology itself for Hindu theistic traditions. Moreover, there was another way in which the Gita was of very great importance within traditional Hinduism, namely as a text in which the various teachings of different strands of Hindu thought are brought together, and in which its doctrine of God and of the love of God is depicted as the supreme teaching to which all these different strands point. As we have seen, the Gita itself presents its doctrine of Krishna as this final revelation that unites everything else. The success of the Gita in doing this may have been the reason why we find that theologians belonging to the non-Vaishnava theistic traditions also wrote commentaries on the Gita. Thus, a very important Shaiva theologian, Bhagavad wrote a commentary on the text in which he argued that in fact the text ultimately serves to depict the god Shiva as the supreme deity. The success of the Gita in this regard also seems to be the reason why the Gita became the model for other sacred texts composed in a similar way and also called Gitas, songs, but in praise of other Hindu deities. Thus, for instance, a much later text, the Devi Gita, is clearly modelled very closely on the Bhagavad Gita, but is written instead in praise of the goddess, the Devi, as the supreme deity, devotion to whom is said to be the final goal and bliss of human life. So the Gita was clearly a very important text in the centuries before the 20th century, but it was not a popular text. That is to say, it was not a text very widely used by the Hindu population. Rather, it seems to be a text known primarily to an educated elite. So how did it come about then that the Gita emerged as the Bible of the Hindus in the 20th century? Well, there were certainly a number of factors, all of which had to do with the complex interaction between Western and Indian cultures during the modern period. And in this next section, I would like to trace these out before looking finally at the particular importance the Gita had for Gandhi and through him for India and the world. Well, one general factor was what is known as the Western construction of Hinduism in the modern period, a construction of Hinduism, that is to say, as being a religion like Christianity or Islam. Historically, Hinduism is not a religion like Christianity or Islam. Over the course of the centuries and millennia, Hinduism has developed as the rich and complex religious culture of the Hindus, that is to say, that population concentrated in India and the surrounding region. And in this rich and complex culture, there is no single founder, no single sacred text, no fundamental set of beliefs and practices that all Hindus ascribe to and from which a single religious system has developed. Hinduism is a single religious culture rather than a single religion. In effect, it is a religious culture that contains many different religions. Now, certainly some of these religious traditions have a greater importance and are taken as authoritative for a greater number of Hindus, as we just noted with the case of the Vedanta. But it remains the case that there is no founding figure like Christ or Muhammad, nor a foundational text like the Bible or the Quran, to which all Hindus refer to and from which they derive their sense of identity, belief, and practice. As Western colonial authorities and Western missionaries encountered Hinduism in the modern period, however, there was a tendency among Westerners to think of Hinduism as being a religion similar to Christianity or Islam, and then to want to find a way of defining it in similar terms. Now, the term Hinduism was itself a Western term, invented in the 19th century to denote the culture of the Hindus, that is to say, of the culture of all those living in India and the surrounding region who didn't clearly belong to another religious culture, whether Islam or Christianity or Buddhism. The term Hinduism gradually came to be taken as meaning the religion of the Hindus. And as an ism, Hinduism tended to Westerners to suggest that there was a system, a set of beliefs and practices that all Hindus had and which marked them out from non-Hindus. And not surprisingly, it was often the texts with which the Western authorities or missionaries became familiar that were selected by them as being the candidates for corresponding to the Bible of Christianity. The Upanishads were one, the final part of the Vedas, which we mentioned a while ago, along with the Vedantic schools of theology, and the Gita was another. And these were among the first texts translated into Western languages. Thus, the first translation of the Gita into English was done by a person called Charles Wilkins as early as 1775, and this translation remained the only English translation for nearly a century. In the preface to his translation, Wilkins says that he has found in the Gita a message of monotheism, which he took as being meant to combat the polytheism and idolatry that seemed to otherwise characterize Hinduism. As such, then, in the eyes of Western missionaries, the Gita presented itself as an attractive and plausible candidate for being identified as the Bible of the Hindus, with its message of the love of God as the supreme revelation. It had obvious parallels with the Christian gospel, and so was a good basis for arguing for the gospel, the Christian gospel, as being the fulfillment of Hinduism's best aspirations and as being superior to it. Now, Western colonial authorities and missionaries were also often critical, to the point of being scathing about Hindu culture, condemning its beliefs and practices as part of a wider justification both of Western colonial rule over Hindus and of concerted missionary efforts to convert Hindus to Christianity. However, during this period, Hindus themselves reacted to all of this and went on the defensive. Those Hindus who had been exposed to Western views, both these colonial and missionary critiques, and to the wider reality of modern Western modernity, with all its ideas and perspectives, adopted but also adapted what they heard, and sought in their turn to present Hinduism as a unified religion, but one that was in fact equal to or even superior to Christianity. These Hindus sought to promote a unified Hindu identity as the basis for Hindu political nationalism, with a growing call for independence from colonial rule. When it came to what part of their rich and diverse Hindu culture they would take for unifying Hindus, one option was for the Vedanta theology we considered a moment ago. Thus, at the end of the 19th century and in the early years of the 20th century, Swami Vivekananda promoted the Vedanta as the essence of Hinduism, the worldview and force that could unite and energize Hindus. He depicted Hinduism based on the Vedanta as an ethical spirituality that had universal value. However, another option was for Vaishnava theism itself, as manifest in its different traditions. Thus, in Bengal, in which Calcutta was the capital of colonial rule until the capital of the Raj was moved to Delhi in the early 20th century, leading figures in Calcutta promoted Vaishnavism as itself the high point of Hinduism and as a universal religion for all of humanity. One result of this was the rise of the Bengali Gaudiya tradition, which was to be exported to the West in the form of the ISKCON, or Hare Krishna movement. And the Gita was promoted as a central text of Vaishnavism, as a monotheistic text centered on the love of God for humanity and the call to human beings to center their own lives on love of devotion to God, but not as something that was fulfilled in the Christian gospel, but which gave a teaching that was equal to that found in the Christian gospels and served as an alternative to it, a Hindu gospel, we might say, for all human beings. Moreover, during this period, the Gita was also promoted as a way of galvanizing and unifying Hindus in their struggle against colonial rule. Thus, the Marathi political activist Bal Gangadhar Tilak asserted that the Gita provided a justification for armed struggle against the British. As we have seen on one level, the whole of the Gita is the attempt of Krishna to get Arjuna to fight in the battle between the Pandavas and the Kauravas, as his duty as a warrior and as a just thing to do. And for Tilak, then, God in the Gita thus encourages violent struggle for a just cause, here being against, in the modern period, being against the colonial authorities. This same approach was later promoted by Aurobindo Ghosh, who was subsequently imprisoned by the British, then fleeing to the French colony of Pondicherry to concentrate more fully on spiritual matters. Both Tilak and Ghosh wrote commentaries on the Gita, promoting such political and militant activism as a valid interpretation of the text, thus making the Gita, as well as their call to such action, much better known on a popular level. For others, however, it was the ethics of disinterested action taught by the Gita, rather than a call to arms, that made the text so important and useful as a focus for Hindu nationalism. Thus, at the beginning of the 20th century, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, the Bengali novelist and writer of immense prestige in modern India, promoted the Gita as an inspiration and exhortation for Hindus to unite and engage in selfless service of the motherland. So in the 19th and the early 20th century, the Gita did become important as a means to encourage Hindus in the struggle against colonialism, inspired by the powerful image of Krishna instructing Arjuna on the battlefield, and by the central teaching of action done out of selfless duty, whether violent or otherwise, on behalf of India and for the emancipation of Hindus from oppression and captivity. Now, the figure whose life and work confirmed this rise of the Gita to prominence was that of Mahatma Gandhi, who led India to independence in the middle of the 20th century. As his life and work progressed, Gandhi certainly came to depict the Gita as the primary inspiration for his religious and social vision. However, in fact, it was contact with the West and with Westerners that caused Gandhi to turn in the first place to the Gita for inspiration, and indeed it was this contact which determined the way he read the text itself. Gandhi's encounter with the Gita was itself then part of the pizza effect that I referred to at the beginning of this talk, the complex way in which elements of Indian religion and culture came to the West, were transformed in the West, and were then reappropriated by Hindus and given a greater importance in Hindu identity, an importance reflected these Western transformations. So when Gandhi came to London to study law in 1888, his own knowledge of his Hindu tradition was in fact quite limited. He had never read the Gita in any language at all. However, while in London, he came in contact with the Theosophists, a group that were at the time promoting the spiritual value of Hindu and Buddhist traditions in the West, and who were to become themselves advocates of Indian self-rule in India. And the Theosophists had adopted the Gita as one of the principal Hindu texts, translating and interpreting it and promoting it as a treasure of Eastern spirituality. His Theosophist friends encouraged Gandhi to read the English version of the Gita produced by Sir Edward Arnold in 1885, published with the title The Light of the East, and Gandhi was enthralled by the text and by this translation of it. Gandhi then began to make the Gita integral to the religious vision he was developing. This vision would take the form of an emphasis on satya, or truth, as the fundamental principle of reality and value, and on satyagraha, or the grasping hold of truth, as the right program for human action, a grasping hold on truth that was to be manifest in the service of all. And a fundamental characteristic of satyagraha was non-violence. Non-violent struggle was at the heart of the program of action that Gandhi developed first in South Africa and then in India in order to achieve social and political change. For Gandhi, non-violence included both a negative refusal to do violence and a positive command to love others. And within his religious vision, non-violence, love, and truth thus really became interchangeable terms. For Gandhi, Krishna's teaching of disinterested action was itself at the heart of satyagraha, at the heart of this program of grasping hold of truth. Thus Gandhi commented that Krishna's words in the Gita, when he says, "Work alone is your proper business, never its fruits, never the fruits it may produce. Let not your motive be the fruits of works, nor attachment to mere worklessness." He says that these were inscribed in his heart, that all his activities in the area of politics and social reform were the practice of disinterested action as commanded by Krishna in the Gita. Now, remarkably, Gandhi interpreted the Gita itself as teaching non-violent action as being man's highest duty, despite the fact that, as we've seen, the central theme of the Gita is getting Arjuna to engage in violent conflict. The fact that Gandhi was able to reach this conclusion was itself the result of his encounter with the Theosophists and with their own approach to the Gita. For the Theosophists had developed a twofold way of interpreting the Gita and any other sacred text. On the one hand, the historical level, which we might otherwise call the literal or straightforward meaning of the text, and second, an allegorical level, that is to say, the deeper meaning the text could be said to have. So Gandhi's interpretation of the Gita's teaching as promoting non-violent action was justified as being the allegorical meaning of the text. The Theosophists had argued that the Gita represented the struggle between the lower and the higher impulses in man, and that the battlefield in which the Gita is set is meant to be the battlefield of human nature. For Gandhi, then, the Gita taught that the higher impulses of man are towards non-violence and the non-violent pursuit of the welfare of all. That this is the deepest level of the ethics of disinterested action that Krishna is teaching. Now, the fact that Gandhi placed the Gita at the center of his own life and teaching served then to raise the consciousness of the Gita as an important text in the minds and hearts of Hindus as a whole, thus confirming its preeminence and popularity as a text in the 20th century, even if his particular interpretation of the text was not accepted by all. And so it was with this most remarkable man, who made himself so great a difference in human history, that the Gita was also confirmed as the book that would itself make a difference to countless others. Thank you very much.
Well, Martin, thank you. That's an amazing talk, I have to say. The complexity of what you've been talking about, to be able to put it in such a way has been a work of brilliance. It was fabulous. And I don't know really where to start, but it seemed to me that one of the first issues that came across when you were talking at the beginning about the necessity of war and this whole business of seeing your own relations there against you. That is just contemporary, because that is exactly what is happening at this very moment in the Ukraine. The relationship, family against family. I know families in Moscow whose in-laws are in Ukraine, and they're fighting. So I mean, I think that there's something very universal right at the start of what you're talking about. Let me go
Yeah,
to
I
the.
think
Yeah, go on,
the
carry on.
in
Yeah.
a former, I mean, I haven't talked a lot about the impact of the Gita on in the West, partly because it seemed to be that the kind of there was a limit of time, obviously, we can talk about, but also the kind of the impact of the Gita was so remarkable in the context of modern Hinduism itself. But of course, the kind of romantics in the West also used the Gita as a support for their own ideas. I think it's a shame that a lot of the time, in terms of the Western reception of the Gita, it was quite a superficial reception, and that this kind of both the sense of ethical conflict that's present in the text, but also this kind of ethics of disinterested action, of doing action out of duty, has never really been taken up as much as it might have been taken up in the West, despite the knowledge of the Gita. It's kind of that kind of this very powerful ethic that people kind of might want to reflect on, even if they don't adopt. You know, could have had and could still have a much greater impact. And as you say, in these different situations where the same types of conflict that occur are still very much present.
Yeah, I'll come to a question here, but I just comment that even going back to Shakespeare in Henry VI, you get the situation where the king sits on a molehill and sees a father who brings on a body finds he's killed his son, and a son who brings on a body and has killed his father. They've both done their duty to the lords that they have to obey, but they've killed in their family. So it's an archetypal. It's deep in our psyche, I think. Okay, there's questions here. Thank you for such a fascinating talk. You mentioned that Gita was a poetic text as well as a text of huge religious, cultural, and political importance. Martin, what do we know about the poet who wrote it? Did they write any other sacred Hindu texts?
Well, the poetry in which the texts are written, I mean, the meters of the poetry are common meters that you find throughout the epic literature and elsewhere. So I mean, kind of traditionally, the figures who are said to be the authors of a lot of the text, but we don't really have a sense of the historical figures themselves so much. But uh, I mean, you couldn't really put in terms of literary analysis of the story, identify a historical author. You couldn't really point to another text that you could say this is the same author. It doesn't have the kind of pointers that make that possible. I mean, as I mentioned, there have been lots of imitations of the Gita because it had this immense power. I mean, although it wasn't a popular text, it was a very powerful text, clearly in traditional Hinduism, because it managed to bring together a lot of ideas under the umbrella of a single vision. So it was imitated a lot, and there are lots of different versions of it. But it's not possible to identify in a kind of historical way that someone else was the author of it. But I mean, it is worth. I mean, I mentioned it, the poetry. I mean, it is worth reflecting on the beauty of some of the literature. When we experience them in translation, the translations are good, but they don't have the resonance of the language. If you read this text in Sanskrit, you really do feel the beauty and the way that the different words are, the different declensions or different conjugations of verbs are used to kind of create a kind of rolling resonance in which the ideas are communicated. I mean, some of the Sanskritic tradition is a very sophisticated literary tradition, was developed over centuries by people, an elite, really, and there was a delight both in a richness of language, which are constantly able to create new words through compounds, but also a richness in the composition of works, where even it is part of a literary technique in certain works to write the poetry in such a way. You have to know that in traditional Sanskrit is written with all the words joined together, and so you have to unpack the words, but it was then used, and so that you could actually read a single text in a number of different ways. So you had a number of different texts in the same written bit, and it's such a sophisticated thing to do, a way of communicating levels of meaning through the literary craft itself.
Very, very interesting. It's completely different from our tradition when we go into the synoptic problem. It's a totally different kind of problem by the sound of what you're saying. Another question: how does one reconcile the idea of disinterested action with the concept of living one's life with a purpose?
Well, there are two ways in which the Gita itself answers this question. One is with it, because of course people are carrying out their duties within a defined society. So traditionally, you've got the fourfold caste system. I mean, the caste system historically is quite a complicated thing, but there's the paradigm that's there embedded in the sacred literature is this fourfold paradigm. Then people have their duties as members of families, which again is reflected in the tension of the Gita, of the epic itself and the Gita. So there is a sense in which people, you have a clearly defined duty. So it's doing your duty. So that is your purpose. It's just that the selfishness of that is taken away. But also, of course, within the theistic vision of the Gita, you're doing it all for God as an act of service and an act of love of God. And so it has that purpose. Everything becomes an act of devotion, of sacrifice to God. And so everything is living out a God-centered life. And yeah, as a kind of a part of that, I mean, as I talked about a bit, then you have this vision of we're carrying out the will of God in the world by doing our duty. So you got there's another level of the meaning. So there is a purpose. It's not that people lack purpose. It's just that they lack a kind of selfishness. Is what the ethics is trying to inculcate in people. So it's not that people are kind of listlessly kind of going through life without its purpose, but of course you have to understand there is this defined set of ethics that is work. I mean, I think, I mean, for the Catholics among you, I mean, it strikes me that there's a very strong resonance between this way of thinking about ethics and canon law, because the sense in which the church in canon law defines duties of people and prioritizes duties really over a sense of rights. which is, that you have you're in the church in a certain way, and you carry out your role in the church faithfully in that way as your duty. I mean, that's there's certainly a sense of purpose to that.
Thank you. A last question here. I haven't got the names of the questioners, so thank you very much for your questions, whoever you are. But and then I'll hand over to Mike to see whether he's got a question. How is the Bhagavad Gita viewed by contemporary India, especially by Prime Minister Modi and his party?
That's a very good question, and I'm grateful as the person who asked it, because I was going to write something on this, but I was conscious of the limit. I mean, one of the well, within the Hindu nationalist movements, the Gita has continued to be a very powerful instrument for uniting Hindus. And in fact, ironically, some of these Hindu nationalist groups, the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, VHP in particular, has argued that Hindus need to unite in such a way that they resemble, particularly the Muslims, because but also the Christians, and that their lack of unity is what makes them weak in comparison to the Muslims. And so they need to have a Bible, they need to have a text, and so it's drawing on all of these different things that have taken place in this rich cultural exchange. So then the Hindu nationalists say that the Gita is our Bible. This is the single text behind which we can unite and be a powerful force to promote Hindu nationalism, Hindu superiority, and to combat against the threat of Muslims and Christians. So this is a very, when we reflect on the kind of way Mahatma Gandhi was using the text, this is a very different way of doing it. But it has continued to be a rallying point for Hindu nationalists. It's just a very different form of nationalism at work. It will be seen as Hindu nationalists as a very much as a text. I mean, I don't. If the question is about does Modi and the Hindu nationalists use it for militant action in the way that sort of Tilak does, I'm sure they do. I couldn't point my finger to a particular text or manifesto where I've seen this kind of language being used. What I know is that they use it as a way of uniting Hindus, but it is in a very militant way. So it wouldn't surprise me that they use it in the same way that Tilak used it to justify military action.
Thanks very much. Mike, have you got a quick question at the end? Are you?
Not so much a question, just an observation. Of course, that famously that there is a reference to that text at the end of T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, and I'm sure because of that, many people in the West went and tried to either find out what that text was about in a general way in order to provide a footnote, or maybe came to the text itself. But I remember that was the way I discovered there was such a text in the Hindu tradition. And of course, like most people in the West, I guess I thought that was the text. So I heard it talked about often. So but my understanding, and please, if I'm wrong, correct me on that, it is the text and is being used now as a kind of repressive device against Christians and Muslims in India. That nationalism and unification has taken maybe an uglier turn than we would like. But correct me if I'm wrong.
No, absolutely. And I mean, it's a very ironical kind of development when it considers, say, the way that Gandhi used the text and kind of himself. It's a very, very difficult, different use of it. I mean, it exists on many different levels, of course. I mean, so that, I mean, people, the nationalist use of the Gita is just one aspect of the way it's used, and I suppose the fact that it's used for many different other purposes also enables it to be a kind of critical response to this particular nationalist use of the text. But certainly there is the use of it by those groups to further their own causes and the conflict and all the difficulties that's brought about.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry that we've come to the end of the session. There was one more question, but I think you've drawn on that question. Thank you, whoever sent it in with Mike's question. So thank you, Martin. That was a terrific lecture. Really, really enjoyed it very, very much.
Yes.
Our next Culture Encounters talk will be on the 6th of October. So we finished for this season, and we wish those of you at Georgetown and elsewhere in America very happy summer holidays. We've just started our new term, so we're going on for another eight weeks here. But it's on the 6th of October, and it's a really important one as far as I'm concerned, because Tom Banchoff, who's been the person behind these series, who's helped us to get these series onto the screen through Georgetown. He'll actually be talking about Pope Francis's Fratelli Tutti, and how appropriate today that I can announce that we're going back to Pope Francis's great works. That's on the 6th of October. And during they'll have 5 talks in all. On Wednesday, the 7th of May at 4 p.m. UK time, we have a free speech at the Crossroads discussion, and it's going to be what's wrong with checking the facts before recording or making statements. And that series goes on monthly throughout the annual year, rather than the academic year. So that's what's wrong with checking the facts before recording or making statements. Wednesday, the 7th of May, 4 p.m. UK time, 11 a.m. US time. Thanks to Georgetown University for supporting the series, especially Vice President Global Affairs, Tom Banchoff. Thanks also to our administrator today, Amy. Thank you very much. I would also like to thank Blackfriars Hall for their support, especially John O'Connor, the Regent, Richard Finn, the Director of the Las Casas Institute, and Dominic White, the Prior, and our UK Administrator at the Hall, John Angus Macaulay. Thanks to Mike Collins for his help and backing of this series all the way through. And thanks to Maggie, my wife, for the administration she helps with here. I'm Mike Scott from Blackfriars Hall, Oxford. You can follow me on LinkedIn at Professor Michael Scott, and on Facebook at Michael Kerr Scott. Thank you for joining us. And again, thank you very much, Martin. God bless. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.